Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us this afternoon. My name is Anushi Chaturvedi, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of IIMB Center for Management Communication. The COVID 19 pandemic has plunged us into a state of uncertainty. In the face of this adversity, all of us are trying our best to appreciate and adapt to this new way of life. We are all constantly updated with the latest news and data. We are on our phones seeking information that may or may not be verified, reading personal anecdotes, reading the latest updates on people we are close to. At the same time, we are personally bombarded with information that our local authorities from our apartment societies directives or our employers' work from home instructions or PM's appeal and various other instructions. What does all of this mean for us? How are we making sense of all of this information overload? Today's interactive webinar will give you a sense of how to be aware of the emotions that play a significant role in information processing. How does all this cognitive need to share information make us forward messages, tweet, share images on social media, and how through all of these connections we can use our communication skills to adapt, adhere, and administer our needs by challenging them into productive ways. Our host today, Dr. Deepti Ganapathy, has been very kind to agree and be a part of our webinar series CENCOM Connect once again. Her previous session on communicating change was very well received. Today, she's speaking on communication in times of uncertainty. Dr. Deepti is a former award-winning journalist, visiting scholar at University of California, San Diego, and Rotary Group Study Exchange Fellow to New Zealand. She holds a PhD in communication from the Department Studies in Communication and Journalism, University of Mysore. Currently pursuing a multidisciplinary interest in social media, Deepti is engaged with scholars in UK, China, USA, and Spain to explore the use of social media for strategic, political, and corporate communication, climate change communication, health communication, and digital activism. I'm very thankful to Professor Deepti for taking this and agreeing to do this webinar on a very short notice. It's something that all of us really need at this time. I'd hand over to Professor Deepti. Before I hand over to Professor Deepti, I'd just like to request all of you, since this is an interactive webinar, if there is anything that you guys want to share, or there are questions, or if there is anything that you'd want to communicate with Professor Deepti, you could write it to me on the chat. You'll find me under the name Anushi, and I would forward it to her. We'll do the same thing at the end of the webinar for questions, so feel free to write in at any point of time. Professor, over to you.
Thank you, Anushi, for such a warm welcome. It feels great to be a part of the CENCOM webinar. This is after 2 years that I'm doing this, and it's always a pleasure whenever you reach out to me. It's always a pleasure designing the webinar because there's so much of interaction involved, and there are so many diverse participants who join this webinar from all over the world. So before I begin my talk today, I would like to, of course, Anushi has given a lot of context behind why we decided to have this webinar on this topic. But before I begin and get into the nitty-gritty of communication in times of uncertainty, the power of visuals, text, and emotion, I want to direct all your thoughts, because I think more than anything, communication is about listening, about being aware to our surroundings in a very non-verbal way. And so I want you to focus all your thoughts towards what I'm going to say in the next 2 minutes. And, join me in saying or sending prayers to families who've lost their loved ones to the COVID-19 pandemic. So good evening and hello to all participants who've joined us from around the world. Before I begin, I wish you can join me in paying humble tributes to COVID-19 warriors and spend a minute sending prayers to families who have lost a loved one. When we first heard about coronavirus in distant, far-away Wuhan province, we read of it as a case of pneumonia with curiosity because of the nature in which it was spreading. We did not think it would affect us, and here in India, there was no chance of it affecting us, we thought. Around March the 12th, it started hitting us closer when schools and colleges were closed and many of us started working from home. The full magnitude of the blow was felt from March 22nd. Researchers who have worked in conflict and war-ridden countries with young adults, senior citizens, and children often talk about the effect of such uncertainty on communication, emotions, and life skills. For us, overnight classes were moved online. Families were separated or reunited according to the logistics of who managed to catch the last bus, flight, or train, or whose employer enforced an interim travel ban. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and not to be left behind, TikTok became the bulletin boards for millions of young adults, and WhatsApp groups turned into proxy news channels. This has been India's story from the last 4 weeks. But there are others in the world for whom the story has been their worst lived nightmare so far, unfathomable and unrecognizable as they continue to be in lockdown. Today, I am joined in this webinar by colleagues, friends, and well-wishers from Spain, United Kingdom, United States, amongst other countries. My emails to them about this webinar triggered such a strong emotional response, and by being sensitive to the enormity of the situation they are in, as they try to make sense of the communication or information overload in COVID-19 times, as I call it, let us observe a minute's silence to channelize our thoughts towards those who have lost the battle, to those fighting on the front lines of this battle, and to those who are battling for their lives in hospitals around the world. Thank you for that. If you look at the screen and you see these words staring back at you, Vladimir Lenin's words make so much sense and we can completely relate to it because we understand the context and because words and images that we are seeing are communicating this to us all the time. Lockdown, quarantine, stay home, sanitize, COVID-19, and the dreaded coronavirus. These were words so far, far away from our vocabulary, somewhere lost in the pages of the dictionary. Today, we use them at least 10 to 20 times a day in our conversation. We read them and yes, we absorb them as we understand their sanctity because we are acting upon these words by staying at home, maintain social distancing, and sanitize ourselves and our surroundings. Now, the COVID-19 pandemic has plunged us into a state of uncertainty. We are being bombarded with information, and the internet seems to be a life support we are clinging to. How are we making sense of this information? Like Anushi said earlier, from our apartment society's directives to our employers' work from home instructions to the Prime Minister's appeal. What does this mean for us? Okay, and so we are reading blogs from psychologists and mental health experts exhorting us to stop criticizing others, stop worrying about the future, stop ruminating on the past, stop expecting too much of others. And in this process, we are hoping rather to become self-aware, become emotionally intelligent. But how can we when we have lost our incentives? When the very industries we thrived in and slogged our time off to jet set for a holiday and become a globe trotter sends us such mails, which you can see on your screen. When our investment advisor, makes the right choice of words and presents tight arguments to hold us onto our portfolios or rather our sails when the water is choppy. When we have no other such event of such magnitude in history to turn back to learn from, apart from World War II and the Holocaust that followed. Traits like adaptability, tenacity, resourcefulness were needed to endure near starvation, terror, and loss of loved ones. And those were the skills Holocaust survivors had that enabled them to flourish in the freedom and opportunities that America afforded. I was reading articles and articles of how to roar out of recession, how it changed the fate for organizations, who survived and who thrived. When we talk about the uncertainty around the current situation, How has another country reacted or responded? Should we follow the same path? Flatten the curve is yet another of those choice of words. Through this webinar, I want to use my experience as a journalist, a communications faculty, and a media researcher to put communication in perspective for you. And let me do that with the most blatant and brazenly used rhetorical device, pictures. Okay, now you can see on your screen a lot of visuals, a lot of pictures. I'm going to use climate change communication, an area I do research in, to begin this discussion because of the fact that when science, policy, and communication come together, it empowers a citizen, that is you and me. Amidst these uncertain times, it's the discovery of a vaccine, the combination of drugs used to treat patients, government policies that matter most in this discourse, and last but not the least, what the media makes sense of this and how they communicate this, again, through the frames that matter most to them and to the audience they wish to reach out to. So if you look at the picture here, you'll see that since climate change communication or climate change was an aspect or a scientific thing that ordinary people or ordinary readers would not understand, the most important visual that came out was that of the Arctic ice melting in the North Pole and the polar bear clinging on to that one piece of ice block and with the headline splashed, "Be worried, be very worried." Okay, so when we talk about communication, I started off by saying listen and then the visuals, the very powerful medium of visuals, because a picture is worth 1,000 words, as they say, right? So from this, what I'm trying to derive is that the COVID-19 pandemic or communicating in these times is so challenging because it lies at the intersection of science, it lies at the intersection of governmental policies, it lies at the intersection of what the media understands by it and how they choose to communicate it to you, because our primary source of information right now remains the media and how they try to communicate that to us. Also government communication and also the power of visuals, which we keeps getting on WhatsApp and keep getting on these social media channels. Now, moving ahead, okay, so when we talk of communication, it's always transactional in nature. And being a journalist, I understand that very well because we write for knowing really well who our readers are. And the main purpose of communication is met if the person whom you are speaking to is able to understand what you are saying. And that's why it's a two-way process. Okay, so these are some of the main questions that we have or put forth in communication as a very basic concept, that who is your audience? What does your audience already know? What are their expectations from you? What is your purpose? Is it to persuade? Is it to entertain? Is it to inform, express? Or is it a combination of these purposes? And that is what, when we go back to 350 BC, what Aristotle did through ethos, pathos, logos, the power of rhetoric, right? So since I have a participant base today who are from the corporate world, academicians, professionals like journalists, architects, bankers, people from diverse fields, medical professionals, I'm going to be using a choice of pictures and words from publicly available platforms like Twitter, which everyone has access to drive this discussion forward. Along the way, I'm going to help you understand the power of emotions in how we communicate during these times, again, from what I have been observing in the past few months. So managing communication in uncertainty, well, go to the main and most credible sources of information instead of falling prey to rumors and getting entangled in the web of misinformation. Since IIMB is a B school and most of you listening today work in organizations where a lot of internal communication is taking place on COVID-19, I'm sure you've got a flavor of how communication is such a strategic tool for organizations to convey their decisiveness through crises like this to their internal stakeholders as well as to their external stakeholders, especially if they are a listed company and the stakes are high, right? So what do you do in your community? How do you build connections? And I've used the word social media here, but this could imply for organizations in general too. It could imply to the neighborhood, your apartments, your societies, the places where you live in, right? So it's a constant process. Like that's why I said it's transactional. So who are the people in your community? Listen to them, keep them engaged. And that process has to go continuously, like a feedback mechanism. Keep listening to them, keep engaging to them, and keep listening to them very clearly to build your connections there, right? So when we talk about navigating the COVID-19 infodemic, okay, many media houses or media forums like the International Journalist Network, which awarded me the Journalist of the Month award in 2017, has come up with this word infodemic, okay, because they say that the coverage prioritizes science and public health over the politics and economics of the response. And this can help keep fears from being exaggerated on the one hand and highlight real health risks on the other. All right. So experts and journalists have advocated fighting this infodemic by debunking falsehoods, rumors, speculation. Now, today there are many fact-checking services. Today, the Director General of Police, Karnataka, has on their Twitter handle shared a link where you can do your own fact-checking. And articles are doing just this, trying to set the record straight. Not all misinformation should be treated the same, however, the falsehoods circulating are a varied bunch. After all, COVID-19 has triggered a fountain of rumors. There is often much uncertainty when new diseases spread, which fuels fear and anxiety. And I've talked about this in my earlier webinar too, about communicating change, right? So tap into the emotions that people go through when there is change, when there's uncertainty, which is fear, anxiety, sometimes curiosity as well. The reality is that people sometimes use stories to make sense of these situations. As the editors of National Geographic recently discovered, people might even seek these stories out for light release. So as the COVID-19 spreads around the world, more and more articles are acknowledging the fears that surround it, delving into the psychology of fear and toilet paper panic buying, for example. Looking at rumors through a similar lens can open up new ways of tackling the misinformation problem. When psychological states are peaked and people are anxious, they are more apt to share inaccurate information, writes Jennifer Gargiel, an assistant professor of communications at Syracuse University. If you're dealing with a rumor circulating an anxious public, seek input from social scientists and psychologists on how best to understand and respond to it. We are in an unprecedented situation when it comes to this pandemic. And for all of us in this generation, this is the first pandemic of the social media era, and the information environment is already unstable given the lack of effective content moderation, policies and infrastructure, and the breakdown in the traditional gatekeeper role of journalists. And that's what's making this entire situation much more unsettling. That's what's making it really, really confusing for us on what to believe, what not to believe, right? So mainstream media coverage tended to reflect social and political preoccupations such as impacts on global economy. And that was what we were reading 2 to 3 months before this epidemic when it started off in Wuhan. So what I'll start with, I'll begin by sharing what happened, with me and my own experience, because on all the WhatsApp groups, suddenly there was this bombardment of information. People started sharing links from this news source, that news source, and I really thought that I should write this, and I started posting it in my WhatsApp groups. And surprisingly, people said, "Oh yeah, we never thought about it this way. So we will, again repost this as our status." So what I said is that we need not start consuming news with such voraciousness. It's the job of the media to report about the outbreak, but it's also your job as a consumer of news to read it, discard it, or make sense of it. There's absolutely no need to keep sharing it, okay? Because each one of us has different preferences, each one of us has different ways in which we seek out information, and I'm going to talk about that later on because my PhD was about, the need for people to share information or why they share information on Twitter. So I'll talk about it later on so that you understand that aspect of it as well. Because when I, in 2014, did a content analysis of tweets by Indian politicians and celebrities, Twitter was a very fledgling medium at that time. It was only in 2008-9 that former president of US, Barack Obama, had started using Twitter, and that's when everyone, realized how the microblogging site is effective in conveying the message. So, we use Twitter to understand why democracy works, or how people are connected, how communication happens. So these were some of the words that we, pulled out and, designed it as a word cloud, and thought about Twitter being one of the main ways in which people communicate, right? So, of course, all of you may not be on Twitter, but what is reflected on Twitter is what the mainstream media also follows, okay? And it's not necessary that you have to be on Twitter to understand it, but it serves as it's like a pool of information which you can quickly harness into. So that's why I'm going to use Twitter today, okay? So why people share information on not only Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, is because they have, as the uses and gratification theory we talk about in communications, that says that, all of us have these needs. So, we have cognitive needs, which are information sharing needs, which we do consistently, which we do with clarity, without any ambiguity there. Then we have affective needs, okay? So many scholars today talk about books like Effective Publics or affective needs. So our affective needs are basically our emotional needs. So are we putting out posts there that are positive, that are negative, that are neutral? It reflects our needs to put out such kind of posts, and that's why we're doing it. Then we have personal integrative needs. The personal integrative needs would be that, it shows our credibility and it shows our status. For instance, are we tweeting it or are we sharing it ourselves? Are we putting updates about ourselves? Are we spreading awareness on issues? So that reflects our personal integrative needs. Then social integrative needs are, what is our social role? Like we convey our personal ideology. For instance, if you are distributing food packets to our city municipal corporation workers, who are collecting our garbage every day during these lockdown times and ensuring it is clean, and we're distributing food packets to them, and you want to put out a message about that or share it on your social media. So it's conveying your personal ideology, it's conveying your influential role, probably because you have networked with many individuals in your society and you said, let's do this, let's contribute towards this empty in the vacant sites next door. There are these construction workers who have nowhere to go and they don't have means to get their groceries right now. So let's contribute and ensure they get their daily needs every day. So when you post information about that, you're trying to show your social integrative needs there. And lastly, it's tension relief needs. So all of us love to do that, right? Like for entertainment, for diversion, we'll go and watch funny videos. We'll consume such kind of news because we just want a few minutes or a few, in a busy day, we want that entertainment, we want that diversion. Okay, so how the government, how people at power can understand that people have these needs, and therefore they help them to channelize their attention towards those directions, is also something that we'll talk about later on, but just have this in your mind. So then I also talked about, how TV news anchors in India surged following the explosion of broadcast news in 2000. So a lot of research shows that there's a lot of journalistic emphasis in the use of Twitter by TV news channels. The discussion on Twitter is dominated by traditional media actors, and the accepted part of its Twitter culture due to its features is sharing news, eliciting opinions, building a better connect. And this is what is, this is what my research found when I sought to do this way back in 2015. So talking about tweets, I use tweets as samples in my presentation today because they are short, they are crisp, and communication on Twitter is transactional, like I said. I use the term transactional because in times of uncertainty, expect the unexpected when it comes to communication. If you consider yourself a responsible citizen, even if you are zipping across the world, keenly listen to what every country is saying, listen to what newspapers and news agencies are saying. And if you are a citizen of a country, like for instance, India, where the Disaster Management Act has kicked in, it means you must listen even more keenly to what the central and what your state governments are saying. Because, we have, under the constitution, we have the union list, we have the state list, and we have the concurrent list, which according to law, the state government is, taking care of the law and order situation, while communication comes under the central government list. So hence, to know what this means for you and your family, you must tune into what the state and the central government is saying, and they're actually saying a lot on the social media. Okay, but it's most important for you to follow their own official accounts on Twitter. Not many of you may be on Twitter, but this is where mainstream media also gets their information from today. Now, I mentioned that communication comes under the union government, but for a country like India, where illiteracy and poverty exist along with growth and literacy, how can the law and order mechanism of a state communicate to its citizens about a pandemic like this and ensure they cooperate? Police departments all over the world have been using social media very efficiently to not only track criminals, but also create awareness campaigns. Bangalore, where the Indian Institute of Management is located, is the Silicon Hub of India and is the capital of the state of Karnataka. Over 30 million people live in this 24th most populous city in the world. And the Bangalore Police Department has a phenomenal task in ensuring that the lockdown is completely adhered to. So they've received a number of awards for being Asia's most powerful police department on Facebook and Twitter. And throughout this lockdown period, they have not only provided credible and timely information, but they have interacted one-to-one with every Twitter user, which is just incredible. Okay, so I started off with the power of visuals, and I want to talk about symbolism in communication today. So how do you convey to a common man, to a person who doesn't understand what a virus is? How do you communicate it through a symbol? So what the police department did is they brought out, they depicted coronavirus as a monster, and they started using it in their street plays to educate the public that why social distancing is necessary, why you should not come out of your homes, and why you should stay at home and break the chain. So these were the powerful visuals that the Bangalore Police Department kept coming out with, and here we can really see the power of visuals in communication. Again, I have participants from all over the world, so symbolism can mean different things in different countries. It can depict be depicted in different ways when we talk about intercultural communication. And that's why it's so interesting to see at the hyper-local level how symbolism, how symbols play a very, very major role in communication by linking it to the culture of that place, by linking it to how it needs to be communicated. And this is, one of the major tasks that the police department has taken up to also make them literate in this aspect of health communication. Okay, so since we're talking about Twitter, it's also true that Twitter or the messages on Twitter, like I started off by showing messages of how an airline is communicating with me, or what my investment advisor is telling to me, and how we are bombarded with so much of information about the COVID pandemic. And on another side, you see, Air India, which has been bringing back stranded Indians from all over the world, from the worst hit regions of the world, their crew being shunned in their own apartment societies and neighborhoods. We can see that. And, in this case, Twitter also, or social media also, becomes a platform for organizations to come out and voice out their angst or voice out their frustration and say, please don't do this to our crew members. Please treat them with uh, empathy they deserve, because they are working on behalf of the country and they're putting their personal lives at stake and moving ahead to do that. So this is also you get a mix of these positive and negative images also. Okay. And then, when we talk of, I started off by talking about, IIMB being a B school and how organizations convey their decisiveness. In this instance, we must look at our country as an organization and, our Prime Minister as the CEO. So it becomes important for organizations or the CEO to show up, and show his or her credibility, because they have more access to crisis related information. They can recognize warning signs more quickly, and they will gain greater stakeholder appreciation via displays of compassion and being more committed to healing the organization. So it is these four main areas that research has talked about that CEOs must show empathy in. And that is number one, detecting crisis. Number two, making decisions. Number three, giving meaning. And number four, restoring normalcy. Okay, so the Prime Minister, President of any nation, is the CEO right now, steering through the crisis and constantly communicating this to his internal audience as well as to his external audience on what's the situation right now. So we talked about the power of visuals, the power of emotions. This picture was posted by somebody who said, that my nephew is all set for Janta Curfew. So for the child, it's a play. It's just a fun game. But for an adult, like a working professional like you and me, or even for a retired person, if they're just feeling caged right now, feeling like, they are holed up in their homes but they can choose to smile, but they are not, right? So it's a very subtle message that the Prime Minister has shared, with a message that children indeed have a very innovative way to mark the Janta Curfew. And I want to talk here about, hashtags as well. So I'll talk about that a little later on. But when I talked about the CEO of an organization making decisions, and saying that, okay, this is what I know, this is what we need to do. So how can images be used in this rhetoric tradition? How is it located within a textual frame and contextualized with a written or spoken word? Okay, so images today have that power to do that, and that's why they seem to be coming across as so powerful in giving meaning. So I talked about how a CEO should give meaning. So what the Prime Minister right now is doing by creating hashtags like 9 p.m. What was that? 9 p.m. 9 minutes 9 p.m. or the Janta Curfew is to pull in, opportunities that people would want to show that, there is something that they're doing in their homes by lighting a lamp or by clapping out aloud, because these were images that came from countries that had earlier gone through this situation. Okay, so what I'm trying to showcase here, because I've done a lot of sessions for senior government officials at the Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore, in the executive program on government communication. And over the last 4 years that I've been doing this, I've met very senior, civil service officers who I know are doing phenomenal work in seeing that government communication works. And so they use innovative media tools, they have a communication strategy in place, all the while trying to create positive impact. Now, let me again talk about the use of text, because I discussed about images earlier, so I want to talk a little bit about text. So increasingly on Twitter, we are seeing, I'm not only going to talk about Twitter, even on Facebook, Instagram, and I've taken these from publicly available resources, so I've masked out the people's names. So Since it's available on a public domain, there's no problem in doing that. So, words like my life took a drastic turn in the last 2 weeks with the onset of and response to coronavirus pandemic. So if you see the words that I've underlined, onset of and response to. So these are two different ways in which communication is happening, right? So the onset means you are receiving the information. Response to means you are transmitting that information. So simultaneously, transaction of communication is happening here because you are receiving, you are understanding what to do, and you're responding to it. Okay, so that's very interesting choice of words that person has used, and that's why I thought I should use it here. And then you have another person saying, I'm 36 years old, and I say that the coronavirus crisis, the closures, the social distancing, the anxiety is surely the wildest, most surreal thing I've experienced in my adult life. I'm curious if older generations would agree, or I suppose others from my own generation. So what's happening here is that people are realizing that they are so connected with the internet and they want the shared experience to come out. They want to know if everyone's in the same situation as them. How are they dealing with it? So we as human beings, we like to connect. We are social animals, so we want to know how this interaction can happen through the connectedness that the internet is giving us. And when I talk about government communication, I would like to highlight what Governor Jay Inslee, he's the governor of the Washington state in the United States, where the first case was detected in Seattle, right, in the United States. So what the governor said was, thank you for staying home. I'm proud of your efforts as a state, but we have an obligation to ourselves and our loved ones to recognize the hard road ahead. So tonight, I'm extending the stay home, stay healthy order for 1 month. So if you see this message, there are many things, many aspects of it involved. On one hand, there's a pat on the back, you guys are doing great, but you have a greater responsibility towards society, and hence there is a call for action. Okay, so here the coinage of the word stay home, stay healthy is meant to communicate to residents of Washington state that, if you stay home, you're going to be healthy. So governments all over the world are trying to come up with very, right choice of words, right keywords, or right hashtags to ensure that the message or the messaging is reaching their stakeholders. So I showed you the slide first. Who's your audience? What do they know already? What is the purpose of your message? So all those questions get answered in this small little tweet or the small little message very, very perfectly. And then, you have like this professor from INSEAD saying, I spoke to an old therapist friend today and finally understood why everyone's so exhausted after the video call. It's the plausible deniability of each other's absence, our minds tricked into the idea of being together when our bodies feel we are not. Dissonance is exhausting, right? So I do Zoom sessions every day for my students, and I feel that because there's so much more energy that needs to be put into your voice, into the way you're presenting, and you can't even see the audience's reaction. You don't know how they are taking in what you're trying to say, and at the end of it, you still don't have that connect that you are seeking for, right? He goes on to say our bodies process so much context, so much information in encounters that meeting on video is being a weird kind of blindfolded. We sense too little and can't imagine enough. That single deprivation requires a lot of conscious effort. I talk about this later also, how children are affected by this because all the classes today are online. So how it's going to have an impact on the way in which they communicate or their cognitive needs in the future, because there's so much that one can learn by observing body language. Non-verbal communication is 70%, while verbal communication is just 30%. So there's so much getting lost here, lost in translation, because we are all doing this video thing. But then there's a brighter side to it as well, and that is these images that are getting shared. And these were stunning visuals of the Dauladhar ranges from far, far away Jalandhar, which were shared by an Indian Forest Service officer When people of Jalandhar saw Dauladhar range, first time ever, Dauladhar's mountain ranges lie at a distance of 213 kilometers from Jalandhar. So the internet today is also being bombarded with pictures like yesterday's supermoon, or nature, or birds tweeting on Twitter rather than humans tweeting. So all these kinds of things are getting a lot of coverage because again I talked about our needs to share information. And this picture or these visuals probably was what also inspired us to go out on March 22nd, the day of the Janata Curfew at 5 p.m. and clap and cheer health workers because we saw it happening in Italy, we saw it happening in Spain, I have a few of my colleagues from Spain who also joined in the webinar. We'll also try and talk to them and ask them how, what they felt when they came out on their balconies and sang and, joined in that collective emotion, that the channelizing of emotions when you're stuck at home but you're connected at the internet, how powerful it was, how beautiful it was. We talk about that. And a lot of research opportunities also, like, for instance, there's this professor who said, "Hi everyone, I'm tracking accounts or tags used to organize COVID-19 solidarity efforts around the world. Hashtags like clap because we care and so on. So will you reply?" So I said, yeah, in India we have this thing. So these present tremendous research opportunities. So like I said, people are sharing pictures of their hobbies, of the diyas, of flowers that they never looked at before. And of course, the analytics, because we are today in the age of analytics, we are today in the age of data visualization. These kind of analytics are gaining a lot of prominence because it's going to provide policymakers a lot of understanding of, it can give them trends. It can show them, okay, this area is going to become heavily infected in a couple of days, or this is what our data shows. So we should direct more healthcare workers, more ventilators to those regions. So there's a lot of this kind of analytics which the media is also circulating around, which is very, very important for the policymakers. But for you and me as a reader, unless we can carefully decipher it and spend some time poring it over or verifying it from different sources, cross-checking it, it could trigger us into a panic mode. So it's important to see how you can consume this kind of information. So now that I've given you a lot of background, communication challenges in COVID-19 times, as I like to call it, involves a lot of communication with yourself, with your family, with your neighborhood, and with society. Okay, and this is going to happen every hour probably, and it's going to be happening very, very frequently, and it's going to be reprioritized daily or at times every hour. You're going to reprioritize this interaction with yourself, your family, your neighborhood, and your society as news filters in, or as the times during COVID-19 changes. And that's what you have to be completely aware of. Okay, so because when I talked about this in my earlier webinar, how do employees react to change? So how do we as citizens react to change? Is we are confused, we are cynical, we are fearful, we are skeptical, and we are curious. So we need to identify those emotions, and that's half the battle won. When we recognize that we are feeling these emotions, then we know how to respond to it rather than to rush or get into a panic mode. Okay. So when I talked about the media earlier, and I started with climate change communication, and I started with the visual of the polar bear and the frames that the media use. Now, what is framing? The framing process is reciprocal and dynamic rather than linear, with news themes in each story triggering consideration, then evaluation of possible news themes in other stories to surface, manifest, as well as latent news frames. So the framing devices, can be identified in stories, and that's what Entman said. He said that it is unique in and empowered through its diverse ability to consider cultural, social, political, and historical dimensions in news storytelling. So a frame, what does a frame do? It gives definition, it gives sharp focus to a picture, right? So most news stories have this framing technique, is uh, which comes across if you do careful research about it. And I want to talk about teachers like me for whom the COVID-19 times has been the biggest online teaching experiment ever, because overnight we had to adapt to Zoom, we had to adapt to Skype. We showed resilience, adaptability, and tenacity very early on. Okay, and that's where I talked about this in my articles in Deccan Herald and the Times of India too, on the challenges of this space, right? So like I discussed earlier, COVID-19 times, communicating uncertainty is um, um, an interaction constantly between science, policy, media, which leads to an informed public. Last but not the least, I started with climate change communication, the polar bear visuals, and I want to end it also with climate change communication, which the president of Kiribati Island said. He said, today our country is on the front line. If we and when we fall, there will be another front line, and that front line will keep moving back until those countries and those people who believe that they will not be affected will be affected. And that is the reality. And that is the reality that we are facing because we are in a globalized world. So the Kiribati Island is one of the first few islands that's going to go underwater because of rising water levels. Okay, so we all should realize that we are connected in this highly connected world. So what happens in one country, there is an implication for it to happen to us. If we have to think about this deeply, and now we have all the time to dive deep into this uncertainty, all the knowledge and wisdom seeping into our consciousness, pouring information. If we have to look at a lobster in the seabed surviving millions of years because it can produce feel good serotonin hormones and read about emotions, psychology, and our responses to them, if we consider what Sigmund Freud said, that the most important decisions of our personal lives should be governed by the deeper inner needs of our nature, I urge you to get in touch with those inner needs. I urge you to ask yourself and your family difficult questions. I urge you to make the most important decisions and choices in these COVID-19 times based on what matters most. Daily or at times every hour, we will have to reprioritize our interaction with ourselves, our families, our neighborhoods, and our society. But as long as you can communicate between these four, you will manage pretty well. Okay, thank you so much for listening to me. Now I'll be open to taking questions. Let me see what Anushi has put in here. Okay, Anushi, can you just read out the questions quickly, because I have to actually go through a whole lot of questions here. Mm,
Sure,
okay.
I'll do that, ma'am. Thank you so much for an insightful session.
You're welcome.
I think my favorite word in this session would be infodemics.
Yeah.
I think that's something really new that I've heard. Because I mean, I'll have to scroll. I'll start with the last question that somebody has just asked, and then I'll scroll up. This is a question from Amrita Girish. It says, how does one express the positive externalities of quarantine felt at environmental, societal, and individual level without hurting sentiments of those gravely affected by this or belittling the negative impact?
How does one express positive emotions?
Externalities, yes.
Okay. So that depends on the context, really. That depends on, what is it that you are trying to showcase. So there are different aspects to it. So your communication can be directed towards what you're feeling right now. Okay, if you're not, let me take a small example. You have to go and get something, you're not able to get it. So do you put your needs at top priority, and do you put your needs above the needs of what has to happen now in terms of everyone adhering to a lockdown? Or do you position that message in a way which says, while I understand this is necessary, what do many people like this who are having these kind of issues have to do? And I can, direct you towards the Bangalore police Twitter handle, because each and every question that people have asked them, like, I have to go somewhere, I have to take somebody for their routine dialysis or for their routine chemotherapy. So how do I go about that? So the police commissioner said, we are going to employ all our 200 Hoysala vehicles, which are patrolling vehicles, to ferry people in emergency around. And if we can't do that, just call 100, and then we'll see that the nearest vehicle reaches you. So these kind of logistic questions, these kind of questions are very well taken care of by the government. You have in every state, you have the Department of Information, Publicity, which has your official handle. And today, that's another thing that I wanted to talk about. It's increasingly creating that digital divide. Uh, it's only the person who has access to online or who has access to a good internet connection who's able to navigate through this crisis right now, which is also very sad, right? What about the senior citizens for whom online banking was unheard of, or who doesn't know how to pay their electricity bills online? So the electricity department says, we are not going to come and pay your take your reading, but we'll average it out. So last month's bill you can pay on Paytm or something like that. So it's also creating that technology determinism is what we call it. That technology, if you are adept at it, then you'll be able to survive. So sadly, it's also creating that kind of a digital divide in these times.
Okay, our next question's from Vineet Sharma, and he's asked us a couple of questions. How can public which is engaging in things like panic buying be made to behave in a balanced way, so that we are able to save this crisis from a public health crisis and it doesn't become a social crisis?
Yes, so that's what I was reading today in the Deccan Herald. There was a nice editorial by the former Chief Secretary of Karnataka, Mr. A. Ravinson, who talked about the New Zealand Prime Minister, how well she had managed certain communication problems when certain situations hit New Zealand. And he said, though it was a very small nation, what matters is being being open to communication all the time. So what in a country like India, where the state has certain access over certain laws and the center has access over certain laws, the center cannot keep interfering with the state. So it becomes again the prerogative of the state governments to, communicate that. And probably there they are not able to rise up to the occasion because again of different cultural aspects of them not being trained adequately. But I do know that, even before, like for instance, what happened yesterday in Noida, there were announcements that said, please, the groceries will be delivered to your doorstep. Please don't panic, don't come out on the streets. So how much can, the government is trying to communicate this all the while, but like I said, the most important communication skill, listening. Because we've been in this rat race for so long, we've not been able to be still, and the stillness is probably killing a lot of people because they are not listening properly. So be very, very keen to listen to what the state government is saying, what your central government is saying, and also to what your district collector is saying. Because in every district today, with the Disaster Management Act in place, the district collectors become the head of, the chief operating officer for that district. So listen carefully. Every day he has an official press briefing. He gives out a press briefing to the media. You can listen to that carefully, either through the radio, television, their own official websites. There are so many means to go and listen to that. And it's just that, people are not listening carefully, and that's what's resulting in this panic buying. But I'd like to bring in, if Selena is there, can you just share your experience with Selena, because she's joined us from Barcelona, of how the situation has been with you. Anushi, can you unmute Selena?
Already done. Selena?
Yeah. Selena, would you like to share your experience of the lockdown, how it has been felt in Barcelona with us?
Yes, hi to everyone. Yes, here in Spain, I think first it started in Madrid. It was the situation worse, but then it expanded to all the country. And what you said before about how clapping at 8 o'clock, everyone in their balconies, it has really joined, I think, the society. And social media has been key on this experience. People have joined and have created a lot of initiatives to just unite societies. And also there has been some organizations that they have sent some flyers to every building, etc. So people can write their names and their mobile phones, and you can help old people, especially old people or sick people from your community and from your neighborhood. So this has been going on, and this has helped a lot of people. For example, in my building, there are some old people, and they were sick. So a lot of the neighbors, we helped them to survive. And it was possible with social media, but also with traditional communication, with flyers everywhere.
Right, right. Thanks a lot, Selena. Thank you for sharing that with us. I also am joined by Professor Kavita Karan. She's joined us from Chicago. Ma'am, if you would like to share what's happening there and how you are dealing with communication right now, it would be great.
Yes. Hi, everyone. This is Kavita Karan from Southern Illinois University, Carbondale, US. And as you would be seeing, there is so much of the rise of number of deaths that are taking place in the US, maybe because we have reacted a little late. But at our level at the university, very proactive measures were taken. And immediately, as soon as the pandemic started, or even before it went to that extent, the university, shifted to online teaching. And we have been doing online teaching for quite a few years now. And those of us who were well versed in moving to online classes, we did. And the others who were not as familiar with teaching online were given extensive help in terms of the department that we have as the Center for Teaching Excellence. And they were the ones who have helped most of our faculty and the students who would need help in getting used to online teaching and learning. So that way, it has been extremely important in terms of moving to online teaching, because it kept teachers safe and it also kept the students safe. And coming to the, some of the aspects that we think in terms of students not having access to internet, or some of the poorer students not even having a computer. The university went out in terms of even lending laptops to the students so that they could actually, seek out help and learn from the online teaching that was going on. So that way, we have, at the level of the universities, I think things are not as bad as one would think. And from the personal perspective, we are keeping a safe distance. We are trying to be home and, entertain ourselves apart from doing the online teaching. So, so far, it's important for people to be aware and, keep that distant social distance, which needs to be, effectively monitored. I like the way India is doing it. It's not, we haven't put in that many restrictions and that many penalties as India has done. So great job being done there.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kavita, ma'am, for sharing this. I also have Uma, who's joined us from London. If you can share what's happening in London, it would be nice.
Hi, Deepti.
Hi.
From a very sunny and beautiful day here in London.
Okay.
Things are progressing quite well. We're waiting for the cabinet to come out today. They're going to decide whether the lockdown here should be longer, give us some idea as to how long we have to stay indoors. There's a very big issue because it's Easter here, and because of the Easter break, people are planning to go out and enjoy themselves. meet family and friends. And so there's a lot of communication from morning to evening, telling people that they shouldn't be meeting their friends and families and that they should be staying indoors. A lot of communication is from radio stations, from TVs, whatever newspapers, online. Everything is stay indoors and forget about Easter. Just enjoy it within your own homes.
Yeah. Your Prime Minister is also recovering.
He's not, yeah, he's okay, but I think the fact that he's still in hospital is not such a good sign.
Okay. Yeah. But the communication has mainly been from the newspapers and the radio. The radio must also be a very important medium for you. Right?
It is indeed. I sometimes listen to BBC World Service just to see whether they're giving a balanced view of things that are going on in the world. And yesterday they were talking about India, and they had a news item about a Bombay, I think it was a Bombay slum, where they've got about a few million people who were being asked to stay in a 2 square kilometer sized area. They were being asked to stay indoors, and they were trying to express how difficult that would be when it's already so crowded.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thank you for joining us from sunny London. I hope the weather is going to cheer you up there. Thank you so much. Yeah, so
thank you, Deepti.
Yeah.
Enjoyed the session very much.
Thank you. With that, let's can we wrap up, Anushri?
I'd just like to thank Professor Kavita, for whom it will be really early morning. Thank you for joining us and sharing your experience. Selena from Barcelona, I think, rightly pointed out that for elders, it's important that we also rely and help them on traditional media rather than just social media. So I think that's also very wise words there. And thank you, Professor Uma, also from London, I think.
Yes.
I'm not a professor, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining. Professor Deepti, I'd like you to take one question which I think is relevant. How can media play a significant role in addressing cognitive needs or mental health for children or students during such testing times?
Very, very relevant question, Anushri. So, if you noticed, last week the Prime Minister held a lot of meetings with people from the print media, from the television media, and from the radio stations, the popular radio jockeys. And he addressed the need for them to be very positive in their communication and to make the public aware of the health aspects of this pandemic. So everyone so far has cooperated with the government in terms of not creating that kind of a panic situation, but being very fact-based. And I really hats off to the Indian media for showing, coming together so united at this point in time, and really playing a very phenomenal role here. But like you talked about children, so I was having a discussion with my friend in Hong Kong. Who said that, I'm working from home and, I have to ensure that my daughter logs into her online session. She has a 10-year-old daughter. Then the child came on the phone and, asked me, so do you know anyone who has coronavirus? And I said, no. So then her mother had to explain to her and say, that's a good thing that she doesn't know anyone who has coronavirus. So children are not able to process this information, what's happening, and it becomes very important for us to address this need of, that they may not be comfortable taking online classes. Young ones, 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds, they may be consuming a lot more, watching these cartoons or watching their Barbie shows on YouTube, but they are not so aware of what's happening right now. And so it's important for parents to spend a lot of quality time with with your children at this point in time, even though they may be working from home, even though it's a big concern for them as well, because in the US especially, I know my friends say that childcare facilities also are not available, which they are hugely dependent on there, right? So it becomes important for the media to also address this issue. A lot of online libraries have made themselves available free. There's a lot of, like Amar Chitrakat decided to open up their repository. So channelize the child's attention into doing, reading, or inculcate new hobbies, so that they are not all the time on this online medium consuming news, or taking online sessions, so that they are also doing something that build their other cognitive skills, or their motor skills and things like that. So another thing that I wanted to point out is the Prime Minister also held some sessions with sports persons and celebrities. And after that, soon after that, you had videos from Bollywood celebrities, or not Bollywood, the film industry from all over the world, all over the country, who film short films from within their homes and said stay at home. And then we had sports persons talking about the importance of fitness while at home. So the government is also aware that social media has a huge power to channelize those emotions in a very positive manner. And so the Prime Minister has rightly tapped into these influencers and helped them understand how they could keep the conversation going, how they could engage people through their positive messaging, all the while ensuring that people adhere to the guidelines of the lockdown.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We have about 10 more questions, but I think we don't have time for it.
We will answer that later.
We will, yes. I have taken a note of it, and with their names, so I will get back to you with your replies at the earliest. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. And I think, like somebody said, there will be a COVID fatigue given all the news and all the data that we are getting. So let's not reach the COVID fatigue at this stage. And I think the key here is to look for positive communication and practice maybe hobbies, or go back to things that you would love doing. Like somebody had shared in the chats that they enjoyed painting, and she's kept it open. She's given her link and she wants feedback from all the participants. So yes, there are a couple of discussions happening in the chat here as well. About various, whether technology is good, bad, whether we can verify the data, and so many things. We'll try and answer some of these when I update the YouTube link. And I'll also share answers to some of your questions in discussion with ma'am. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Have a good day. Stay safe and stay indoors. Thank you very much.